Welcome to another video by Ferris Technology. I get really excited when I start talking about arrays. It's probably my most fascinating and most interesting data type out of all of them. So let's share with you what I have here. First off, we'll start with a fixed array. A fixed array looks like this when you dimension it. Now, it says dim, and A customers is the name of the variable, and in parentheses it has a number, and the number dictates how many of A customers you will have within the array. In other words, an array is a literal multiplication of the number of variables that you can establish. So in this case, there are 11 variables in this array, starting at 0 and going to 10. So I can have A customers, and in parentheses 0, A customers 1, A customers 2, and they're going to be all long integers. Okay, so the variable type is long integer. So that's the way you dimension it. Now for clarity and not having to remember that all of these start at 0, you can use this syntax of the variable, dim A customers, and in parentheses you say 1 to 10. So this one will start at 1 and it'll be exactly 10 long, and it tends to be quite a bit more clear, and this one's dimensioned as a long variable. So you dimension the variable, and here we're going to do A customers 1 to 5 as a double, okay? And a double means there's a decimal point on the right-hand side. We're going to then initialize it with A customers 1 equal 0.2, A customers 2 equals 24.6, and we can label all of those, and we've got 5 variables that we can use. Now, the neat thing about this is that having a check digit there allows you to loop through it, put it in a for next loop and that kind of thing. It also allows me to use one variable name and type and be able to plug a whole bunch of different numbers into it, which can be extremely useful in your coding as you get more complex in the coding that you do for your applications. So there's also the ability to put basically any number in this array. So here I'm going to just play around, and we're going to have a variable called random. And this array variable, that's the A here, is going to be initialized as a double. Now for I equals 1 to 5, I'm going to initialize that with a random number. And then for A 1 to 5, I can also then multiply each one of those numbers by 10. So I've got 5 numbers being multiplied by 10, 5 random numbers being put in there, and then I can debug.print to print it down into the immediate window. So quick and simple. And notice 3 for next loops, quickly initialize it, quickly multiply it times a number, and quickly then output it to a debug window. So let's look and see how that works. So here we've got the code to the right. I'm going to hit play, and boom, we've got 5 doubles that were output, were initialized, and told to multiply it times 10. And then we debug.printed it to the immediate window. And here's our 5 variables that we put in there and multiply by 10. So we have really a very quick and easy way to store and to output variables very quickly. So let's talk about 2-dimensional arrays. Now, understand there can be 2, 3, 4, 5-dimension arrays. They get a little bit cumbersome when they get bigger, but if you've got a cube of data that you want to initialize and keep track of, sometimes that just makes sense to do it in an array that is very large. So it's kind of like this block up here. This is a 2-dimensional array with 2 and 3 different dimensions. So here, because it has 3 one dimension and 2 the other, it multiplies and you have 6 separate data points that you can put in there. Now I'm going to show you how we would use that. I'm going to say we're going to put information about presidents in there. And I've got a first name, a last name, and the years that they served in office. So my first variable, this 1 to 2, I've got 2 lines of data. So 1 to 2 is going to be George Washington serving from 1789 to 1797. And then I have John Adams, who served from 1797 right after him for 4 years until 1801. I'm going to take and do a debug.print and push it out into my immediate window. And in the immediate window, I'm going to take my variable a POTUS, the check digit of I, so that's going to be this first one here, and 1, because that's going to be my first spot here. I'm going to do the space function. There is a space function. This is going to be 1 space. I could also have done a double quotation mark with a space in the middle. Wouldn't have mattered. Space is a little more clear. You don't have to wonder what that's all about there. And a POTUS I, comma 2, and a space. And here's my character that lets me put it on a new line. Was president in the years, a space, and then the third piece of data, which is the dates. Okay, so let's go see how that works. So here I have it in the code window. Immediate window is at the bottom. When I hit play, George Washington was president in the years 1789 to 1797. John Adams was president in the years 1797 to 1801. Very quickly initializes it and outputs it. And there you have an example of a 2-dimensional array. I love the aspect of being able to put these things in cubes. Now, there's a few additional things that you can do with arrays. First off, there's some functions that you can do with arrays. The boundary functions help to establish what the boundaries are in a particular array. So for I equals the lower bound of a contacts, in other words, we've initialized a contacts and we've told the array values in a context. So a contacts, and in the parentheses we had a number, to upper bound. So you can have an array that might be a variable array. In other words, an array that could be redimensioned at any moment. And in doing that, you would then be able to find the upper bound and lower bound of that array and still be able to loop through it, even though it's a number that changes every once in a while. And we'll show you how that's done in another example coming up. If I have a 2-dimensional array, I can look at the lower bound and upper bound for one side of it or the other side of it, or both, and we can loop through both sides of the 2-dimensional array like you see on the screen here, okay? So dynamic arrays are dimensioned without a number in the parentheses. And in this case, the number missing is still going to be a long integer here. And then we can use the redim keyword to redimension a products and actually put the numbers in. And we'll show you an example coming up here why we would want to redimension something. I'll show you an example. Okay. Here we have kind of an example of putting a few of those together. And so what we've have up here is a variable array declared a forms with no number here, and it's going to be a string variable. Okay. We have a form variable. So this form is going to represent a form. We have form count as a long integer and I as a long integer. This is going to be our check digit for the for next loop. Okay. So now we have another keyword here that I haven't introduced you to yet. If you have, we've talked about forms being an object, but forms can also be a collection as well, in the respect that there are a number of forms in an application. So at the application level, you can have application.forms.count. Now what that does is it tells you how many forms are open on the screen in this context. And if that's greater than 0, in other words, we have at least one form open, then we'll redimension a forms that was left as a dynamic array up here. We'll redimension a forms to 1 to application forms count. Now, for each form in application.forms, form count equals form count plus 1, forms, a forms form count equals form.name. So we're going to use the name keyword to get the name of this form and put it into a forms in the form count variable here, okay? So for I equals the lower bound of a forms to the upper bound of a forms, we're going to debug.print that this form is open. So we have actually a lot going on here. It involves dimensioning as a dynamic array. It involves redimensioning it right here as we know how many forms are actually open by getting the count of applications.forms.count. We loop through it to grab that form name and put it into a forms and one form count. And then we loop through it from the upper bound to the lower bound, or reverse that, lower bound to the upper bound, and then we output it to the printer. So let's go see how that works. Okay, so now we don't have any forms open in our window here, okay? So we're gonna go to our code window and we'll run it. And notice that we didn't have anything come up in our forms window, in our immediate window here, okay? I'm gonna put the cursor in the code area there. I'm gonna open one form, and by putting the cursor in there, it won't give me that extra dialog box. So click play here, and notice it says form contacts is open. Okay, so we'll erase that. Let's open another couple forms just to show the dynamic nature of that array. The first time we went through it, it says there's no forms open. The second time we went through it, they found one. Now it finds 3. In other words, we're able to dynamically change the value or the upper bound of that array simply on the fly by being able to use the redimension command to then find the upper value as soon as we have it available to us. So in dynamic arrays, sometimes you dimension and put data into your array. Once you put data into your array, if you just redimension that array, it will erase the previous data. Well, you don't necessarily want to have the previous data erased in all cases. So there is a preserve keyword that allows you to redimension an array and make it larger. Of course, if you made it smaller, you'd still lose data. But if you made it larger, it would add more values dimensioning to the bottom of the array without having to lose the data that's already in the array. So in that way, you can add data to the array as it comes up, and the array can keep being more and more dynamic as time goes on. Okay, here's a couple more functions that you can use. The array function allows you to give an argument list to the array. Now, param array is another command I'll talk about in a moment. But basically, this array can have a whole bunch of parameters put in here, separated by commas, and then you would say that they were a variant type. Now, param array allows you to pass an argument list to param array, and in this case, like I can pass, half a dozen numbers to this argument list. And by doing so, I could have this array function then put those values in each cell in the array. And then later on, I can find out how big this was by using an upper bound function to figure out how many arguments it actually put in. Now, split is another array that you can use where you have a string expression. You can put a delimiter in here like a comma or a semicolon. You can have the limit as far as the length goes, and you can compare two different arrays. The join array function allows you to take a source array, meaning a lot of different values, like, a lot of different names or a lot of different places, and put them as a comma separated list, for example. So your delimiter can be a comma, and your source array can be filled with a whole bunch of data points from your data table, for example, and you can put that in there and join them all together in a list. So there's various different things there. Join works really, really nice. Alrighty, so those are the array functions. A lot of territory covered in just a short period about arrays with a little demo in between. I hope you gained something out of it. If you do, hit that like button for me, would you? And if you can subscribe and come back later and help the channel grow, that would be so much appreciated. We'll talk to you later. Thanks.